Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman, and today we are going to be going through my scraps, and I'm going to show you a picture here of my tub of scraps. I am going to show you how I go through and get it cut, sorted, organized, stored, and ready to use to make beautiful quilts. We're going to be using my Speedy Solutions techniques, and you can find information about that in my techniques book, in my patterns book. I'll have a link to these books below, but you can also find a video that I will also link below, and that will walk you through step by step exactly what I'm doing here today. But I can't wait to get started. I have a lot of scraps to get cut, sorted, and organized, as you can see from the photo. First of all, we want to gather some of the things that we're going to need and have them available at our cutting station. We do need an ironing board set up right where you're going to be cutting. So I've got my cutting station here. I'm going to set up my ironing board right behind me in just a minute. But first of all, you're going to need to make sure you switch out the blade in your rotary cutter. You want to make sure that you have a nice, sharp blade. I like to put my used blades in something that I mark indicating that it's used. And you can use those sometimes for paper cutting. They're duller, and sometimes if you need to do a lot of paper cutting, they are good for that. But it also protects you from the danger of having an open blade anywhere in your trash. Here are my new blades. So I went ahead and got myself a new blade in here. You do want to gather what you're going to use for starch. It's important that you have some body in all of these bits and pieces that we're going to be using in our scrap stash. And by the way, my Boston Terrier, Bailey, she's down here with me today enjoying herself. She's at my feet, and she's snoring again, just enjoying herself. So if you hear noise in the background, that's Bailey having a wonderful time, just probably dreaming. Here we've got Best Press. Here we have Acorn Precision Piecing. Maybe you like magic sizing. Any of these products are fine to use. Just find your favorite starch that you like to use. Do remember, as you are storing your scraps, once you've sprayed them, you do want to store them in airtight containers. And I have been using for many, many years these airtight containers that work beautifully. I've never had any issues with bugs in my stash. I do store all of my fabrics in my basement, have for 30 years, I guess, and I've never had any issues. But it's just a good thing to do, just store them in airtight containers, because any type of a starch has a sugar. It produces a sugar, which of course attracts bugs. I don't think precision piecing does. That might be the one that doesn't have that issue. I'm not sure on that. I'd need to check that out. But these are some options for you. You definitely need to start. I also use steam, so I have distilled water for my iron. And then I also gather templates, or excuse me, rulers for my cutting mat in my rotary cutter. I've got all kinds here. I've got long ones as well. These are just some that I have at my fingertips. This 6.5-inch OmniGrid is my favorite. I love using it for a majority of my cutting and piecing when I'm going through my scraps, because it maneuvers around so easily on the scrap piece, and I can cut anywhere from a 1.5-inch to a 6.5-inch square using this. Now we're also going to be cutting strips. Strips in our stash is really important. So you're going to want some longer rulers. I have one here that's I think it's a 12-inch ruler, but I've got longer ones as well, so that you can cut nice strips. And we're going to be talking about strips in just a minute. You're also going to want to have some template rulers. I have an orange peel, a tumbler. I have some of my own templates that you can find on my site. This is one of my Dresdens, and this is my rhombus. And these are just wonderful options to have so that you can go through your stash and cut up lights, mediums, and darks using templates so that you can quickly and easily make a quilt using those. Here is something else that I've created, which really helps me. It's a cardstock, but it's a poster board type, or a foam board, I should say. And I just get it at the dollar store, and it just really helps me. I like to put sticky notes across the board in the different sizes. These are the sizes that I like to cut. And of course, I go up to 7, 8, 9, and 10 inches as well. But right on this particular board, I just have enough that fit up to 6.5 inches. But this just really helps me. And I like to make sure that I have a ruler handy so that as you're going through and you're cutting them, put them immediately on the above the size that they are, because if you just have them all laying on the table, it gets confusing. They all start looking the same size. So I like to immediately place them in piles. Right now, they are not organized by value. They're just being stacked. So I have this available. I also have one for strips and templates. And this one right here is just a poster board. So I have strips here for 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3.5 inch strips. And I will cut those and put them in here. We'll talk about strips and how I cut those in a minute. And I also have a section for templates, and they're pretty obvious as to what they are. So I just have that there. So I have these available. They're on a separate table to the side. So as I'm cutting, I will be able to place them immediately where they belong. And that way it's easier for sorting and then organizing. So now let's take a look at my first bundle of scraps. So I've just grabbed a stack from my bin, and now I'm going to start cutting and getting it pressed, because that's very important. We need to get it pressed first. You're going to notice in here that I have some corduroy. I do cut up a lot of upholstery, corduroys, velvet, satins. I cut up a lot of that. I am a garment seamstress as well, so I do have a lot of remnants of that. And the reason that I cut that up is because I love to do art quilts. And I'm going to share with you here a few photos of different art quilts that I've created, of our Boston Terrier Bailey and of our French Bulldog Baxter. I've done some fun little Nana quilts is what I call them, where they're photos that I've put together in quilts from my granddaughter as she was growing up. I've got those, the I Love You. I also have a art quilt that I created of my granddaughter Danny using pixels. So they're tiny little squares in various values to create an actual pixel quilt. So I use my scrap stash not just to make traditional quilts, but also to make art quilts. You can use it for modern quilting. You can use it for garments. There's so many things you can do with your scrap stash. Now, let's get this pressed, and I'm going to talk to you how I accomplished that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is spread out as many of my remnants of fabric on the ironing board as possible. And then I'm going to give them all a good spray with the starch. And then I'm also going to steam them as I press them. And I'm literally putting some of these strips on top of this corduroy here as I get it ready. So I'm going to press as many as place as many as I can that will fit nicely on this area here. I'm going to steam and press it. And then we'll move it over to the cutting table. These are pressed. I've kind of placed them in the center, and I'm just going to carefully pick this up and move it over to my cutting table. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this again. I'm going to lay out as many pieces here as will fit nicely on this ironing board and press them next. The goal is to get as many, a nice pile cut, a nice pile pressed and ready for cutting. I'm running across some interesting things. I'm going to show you how I'm going to cut up something odd like this. You can get a square out of that. That is a usable square. And what's left over can be thrown in my crumb quilt container. I have a basket where I throw crumbs. This is something that it was a facing that I had used for a garment, or I was going to use it for a garment. It's been interfaced. I can actually use this for a collage quilt. There's parts and pieces of this that I could absolutely use when I'm collaging. So I'll throw that in my collage basket. I have a basket of things that have maybe some fuse already on them or interfacing like this, and they'll work fine for collage quilting. So I just wanted to point that out, and I'll show you how I'm going to cut this up in just a minute. Once I get a good stack of fabrics pressed, I bring them over here to my cutting table, and then I kind of sort through them. I like to start out with the smaller pieces and get those cut up first. And I do want to point out, this is a piece of fabric that is a garment fabric. It's a very loose weave to this. So this is not something that I would want to put in a quilt. However, I could use it in an art quilt or a collage. So that is something that I would probably keep for my art and collage quilting. So it'll either go in the art basket or in the collage basket. So I'm going to keep that here. I could cut it up into squares, but I'm thinking I prefer just to keep this in one long piece because I think I'll be able to use it that way. In an art quilt. Now let's get going with some of these. Go through the stash that you already have to identify what sizes you need. Do you need a lot of strips? Do you need certain size squares? What are you running low on? That's what I like to do. I go through my stash and find out what is it that I'm running low on. What should I be focusing on when I'm cutting up my strips? Maybe you only want to cut up 2.5 3.5 and 5-inch squares, and that's all that you want to cut from your stash. That is great. This is your scrap stash. Cut what works for you. I do like to cut up a lot of strips. This is another piece that's going to go into my collage basket, so that stays over there. I do like to cut up a lot of strips. Do measure your strips that you find in your stash and just ensure that they truly are an accurate measurement, whether it's 1.5, 2, etc. I don't save a variety of sizes of strips. I save the widths that work well in many patterns. So I do save 1.5 inch, 2, 2.5 inch, and 3.5 inch wide strips. I will save a strip anywhere from just this length here, which is about 10 inches, all the way to the width of the fabric, because you'll find yourself being able to use these in a variety of projects. In fact, in some of the strip set series that I've just recently done for you, this is something that I could absolutely have used in that. So I will measure that, make sure it's accurate, and then put it on the 1.5 inch strip set cardboard. So that's where I'll store that. Then I'm going to start working on some of these and get them cut. So let's see how that's done. One other thing I wanted to mention, this is an orphan block that it's from the, it's a setting triangle actually from a previous quilt. I think it was a sample that I had done. What I'll do with this is actually create a crumb quilt from this, or a crumb quilt block. I may chop it up even smaller as I'm making my crumb quilt block, but that's what I'm going to use this for. So this goes in my crumb quilt basket. I'm going to save that and actually use that. I've stacked about 3 of these that I'm going to cut. And again, I always grab my 6.5 inch ruler right away if I can possibly use that. Now, when you make your first cut, you always want to find the straight of grain. And my straights of grains are along here. And measure to see how wide this is. There, in my techniques book, I tell you when you put each scrap down on your cutting table, the first cut that you should make is cut the largest piece possible, and then just continue cutting the largest piece possible from that square. And that will give you a nice wide assortment of different size squares. Or if you are simply cutting specific sizes, then that's what you do. Cut those specific sizes that you might be running low on. In the case of these 3 squares that I put together here, they don't measure 4.5 inches, so I can't do a 4.5 inch cut, but I can do a 4-inch cut. So I'm simply going to put this here. And if I had put this on my rotating mat, that would have made this so much easier. I forgot to do that. I'll pull it out here in a second. And I'm just lining up this. Now these tiny little pieces here, they will go in my pet pillow. So there is a pattern in this techniques book for a pet pillow. Once you make the pillow, you can either tape it or clip it to the side of your cutting table and then put this in that pet pillow so that every couple of months you've got a fresh pillow for your pet that has been stuffed. Here is the leftover remnant, and it's not quite 1.5 inches. So what I'm going to do with this is put it in my crumb quilt basket. This will work beautifully as I'm putting together crumb blocks. So that goes down in my basket. This is a 4-inch, or a number of 4-inch squares. So I'm going to put this over on my container here with the 4-inch squares. So that's where that goes. on that cardboard. So here we have some other pieces, and some of them are kind of weird. Can I even get a 1.5-inch square out of this? I really can't. I don't cut anything less than 1.5-inch square for my stash. That will result in a 1-inch square finished in your quilt. And to me, that's small enough. But there are some quilters who love cutting out tiny little squares, and they love putting together quilts using tiny squares. So if that's you, you could certainly cut this up and put smaller squares in your stash. For me, this is going to be a crumb piece, so that goes in my crumb basket. Here we go. What do we have here? It's not going to be quite 2 inches, so this one will become a 1.5-inch square. And again, I'm just finding the straight of grain. Always make sure that you've got your pieces on the straight of grain. Every square that you cut should be on the straight of grain. And because you've pressed them and starched them, they should have some body in them, so they'll be much easier to use as you're piecing. This is going to go on that cardstock above the 1.5-inch. This can go into my pet pillow stash. So nothing goes to waste. So let's see what this weird little piece measures. Okay, I can get a 2-inch cut out of there because it has width enough for 2 inches. We'll flip it around and cut 2 inches on this side. And this is obviously taking me longer because I'm talking to you as I'm going through this. When you're doing this at home, you can do this so very quickly. I definitely put on music or some sort of a television where you can watch something, because this is just kind of mindless work. So I have a couple of 2-inch squares, and this will go in my pet pillow. So as I'm cutting them, I'm putting them on this cardboard here. Now on this one, I'm not sure if you could see it real well, but there is selvage there. There are holes on the edge, and that's a very tightly woven edge there. You don't want that anywhere in your quilt, either in the piecing or in the backing. You never want a selvage in there. So remove the selvage. That's another one of the rules that you'll find in my book. There's a variety of rules that will walk you through how to cut up your stash in that book. So that again can go into my pet pillow. We can get a 2-inch, 2 inches as large as it will go. When I cut my scraps up, I do not cut anything other than 1/2-inch increments. So it's 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, etc. If you have a pattern that calls for a square that maybe needs to be 2 5/8, what I simply do is go to my stash. I would go to my containers. I'd actually pull my 3-inch container, and I'd pull out the quantity, whether it's 60 lights or 40 darks or whatever. I'd pull a stack out, and I would simply trim 1/8 of an inch away from 2 sides, and then I would have so very quickly that amount of squares that I needed. So let me cut these. This white one is hard for you to see because it's white on white, but I'm going to just quickly get it cut. So on this one, because it is really awkward, it's on the bias, I had to first of all get a cut on the straight of grain, which I followed the selvage there and did that. And then I went in 1.5 inches because that was really the width I could accomplish, and I've cut that. I could cut this as a strip if I choose to. These can all go on my pet pillow. This can go into my crumbs, and I can use this for crumb quilting. I've got many videos out there on how to use up your crumbs. This one I could cut up into a couple of different 1.5-inch squares. So I do accumulate a lot of 1.5-inch squares, typically from these leftover triangle pieces when I cut them up. And they make up some pixel quilts, lots of great quilts. So I've got patterns and videos also for you using 1.5-inch squares. All right, so what I've been doing is cutting up those squares, throwing the scraps over here. It's going to go in my pet pillow, the tiny scraps. And the other ones, the crumb scraps that are bigger than that, I'm throwing down here in the basket, which is my crumb basket, off to my left. And now I'm coming to some larger strip pieces. So what I might do with this, it's not quite 5 inches wide. So what I could certainly do with this, and I think I'm going to cut this one in strips because I want to get some strips cut up as well. I think I'm going to do a 2.5 inch strip here. And this other one will probably have to go down to 2 inches. Yep, I'll have to cut it at 2 inches wide because it's not quite 2.5. And that will go on my pet pillow. So these strips I'm going to put on my strip cardstock. I'd mentioned earlier to be careful of these strips and ensure that they're actually a correct measurement, the entire length of the strip. As you can see, this one's pretty wild. I am going to see what I can do. I can't quite get 2-inch width out of it, so this will be a 1.5 inch strip that I'll be cutting. And all of this extra, that'll probably go on the pet pillow. So here's another 1.5 inch strip. From this strip, I am going to cut some templates. In fact, I'm going to share with you now. I like to cut up a lot of templates, especially if I find a lot of baby-themed fabrics in my stash, because it's a great way to put together a baby quilt quickly. We often have generosity quilts that we need to put together for our quilt guilds, or maybe there's a baby shower coming up and you just haven't had a chance to work on a quilt. But using your stash and templates that are already cut really helps you to put this together fast. So with this, this is a rhombus, and it simply works on here beautifully. Let me flip it around and cut the other edge. I have these templates available out on my website if you're interested in those. And probably you all have templates like this, but definitely take advantage of cutting those up and having a variety of templates cut up in the lights, the mediums, and the darks so that you can make a complete quilt. That's really cute. I didn't finish cutting that. There we go. So, and with this leftover piece here, let me find my square. Here it is, buried. I can cut a 2-inch square from that. And these pieces here I might be able to use in my crumbs, so I'll put those in my crumbs. And these I'm going to put on my template container here. There we go. Okay, now let's look at tumblers and these orange peels. Let's move this out of the way. So here I've got a really fun fish print, and it's it must have been cut from I don't ever remember making a quilt from this. So this is probably stash that I received from someone. I get a lot of stash from people, and so that it's fun to be able to cut it all up. What I could do with this, I could it's wide enough that I could put my orange peel on there and create some beautiful orange peel applique pieces there. Or I could actually get some of these tumblers out of this. Let me see if I have enough fabric. I think I do. I'd be able to get about, nope, not much, because it's starting to go at a slant there. So it doesn't look like I'm going to have enough to do this size tumbler, but I could simply cut the width of this, and the width of this one is 3.5 inches wide. So if I was to cut this strip at 3.5 inches wide, then I would be able to flip this template back and forth along that 3.5 inch wide strip and cut out a whole bunch of fun fish templates. So as you saw me cut up this strip, I have a number of these fun little rhombuses. They're diamond shapes. I also was able to cut from the half portion of this rhombus the triangle, which kind of helps to end the piece, or it goes in between the rhombuses. So I've got one of those triangles that fit with the rhombuses. And this will go in my crumb. This is going to go in my pet pillow. Here is a 2-inch square that I was able to finish. So from that strip, I got a lot of different pieces. All of it is going to be used somewhere in some form or fashion. And this leftover section of that strip, it doesn't measure a complete 1.5 inch, so I won't use it as a strip in my stash. However, I am going to keep it in my crumb basket because often when I'm crumbing up blocks, as you get to the outer side of the block, you need longer crumbs to finish off the block. So that's what I'm going to do. It goes in my crumb basket. I have this really strange piece of fabric. It's a cotton fabric. It's really cute. It's just shaped, I don't know what was cut out of it, but this would be really cute in applique pieces. And it would fit this nice large orange peel beautifully. So I could cut out some of these orange peels from here, and I can probably get 3. I can get 2 here, and then I can open this piece up because it's on the fold and get another one right here, and I'd get 3 from this side. I might be able to get a couple from this side. It would depend on the length. Let's see. Nope, I wouldn't be able to. I've got a smaller orange peel that I could probably use for this side. But how cute that would be to put together a flower on a quilt using these peels, or these could be maybe the leaves on a flower on a quilt. There's so much that you can do. Just be creative as you're going through and cutting, but definitely use up your templates and use your templates as you're cutting up your scrap stash. It's a great way to take advantage of all of the scraps that you have, the remnants. And as you've noticed here, the pieces that I am cutting up are remnants from previous projects. I am not cutting up yardage. I am not cutting up fat quarters. I am cutting up remnants from previous projects, whether they're quilt projects or garment projects or just stash that somebody has given to me. We also want to get some large pieces for our stash. This will not quite make it at 6.5, but I can get a 6-inch square. I have a number of patterns, especially in my mystery quilts, where I'm using the 6 and the 6.5-inch squares, so you can check that out. If you're looking for patterns that will allow you to use those pieces. And let's see, let me grab some red pieces here that I found. I'll cut some more of that here in just a minute, but first I just want to focus in on the larger pieces. So we want to identify the straight of grain. Study your fabric. This has been ripped at an angle. I'm not really sure how that happened, but it did. So we want to find the straight of grain, and I can actually see the threads. I'm close enough here that I can see the threads and can literally follow a thread down here to make sure that this gets cut on the straight of grain. So I'm going to just lay this down here like that. And I'm going to cut this. Number one, I want to get rid of all this fuzz on the end that goes in the pet pillow. And if you're able to pull a string out and pull it all the way across your the bottom, and this is not quite on grain, so I need to work on that a little bit more. If you're able to pull a thread from the bottom and just pull it across the bottom of the fabric, you definitely then have it on grain. So that's the goal, is to be able to pull a thread and it comes out. That means that this is on grain. That is a straight line that you can use then to start your cuts. So what I'm going to do here is see if I can get a 6.5. I can actually get a larger square out of that. Maybe I can even get a 7-inch square from this. Actually, I'll get a couple of 7-inch squares from this. Flip it around. Remember, the goal is to have everything on straight of grain. So this looks good. I'm able to see my grain lines, and that looks like it's on grain. Here's one last piece on the fold. What can I do here? Get some of that batting fuzz out of here. This might even go, I thought maybe I could go to 8 inches. I can't go to 8 inches, but I can go to 7 inches here. So there we go. And again, I can cut some squares out of this also. Another thing that I like to really have in my stash is a bunch of the 10-inch squares. The 10-inch squares are great for the disappearing black patterns. You can create a very large quilt using the disappearing black patterns so quickly. They just go together well. You're putting together a light and a dark, or a light and a print, whatever, and you're sewing it together, cutting it apart, sewing it together, cutting it apart, and making some beautiful, beautiful designs. I do have some disappearing black patterns on my website, or on my YouTube channel, excuse me. And I also have another one that I'm going to be working on here in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. But you might have the 10-inch square template, or you can simply use, if you have a 12.5-inch OmniGrid ruler, or any kind of a ruler that's larger than 10, you can use that. You don't have to have any special tools to do any of this. Maybe you even have the Stripology rotary cutters that work beautifully for cutting up strips of fabric if you have a large chunk of fabric that you're stripping up. My remnants typically are not that large, so I don't usually use my Stripology rulers. I simply go to my OmniGrid rulers that I have on hand and cut things that way. If I am creating a quilt from yardage that I've cut or that I've purchased, then I'll use my Stripology rulers to cut up all the strips that I need in the squares. Here is this corduroy piece that I'm going to strip up. I'm going to cut a 10-inch segment from the center because I can. I am lining it up along the corduroy line there. Corduroy has a line there, and that's what I am lining it up on. And I'm going to need to flip this so I can cut this side. And one more time. So I've got a 10-inch square here. I'll be able to use this for an art quilt, or maybe I could even use it for a pocket or something on a tote or a bag or a little tiny bag, makeup purse, whatever. There's so many things that I could use this for. So I will store this in with my 10-inch squares, and I periodically go through and just I do separate my upholstery and corduroy and all of those various fabrics from my regular cotton. I keep them separate, and that way I know that I have them. In just this few minutes this morning, I have gotten all of this cut up. There's quite a bit of squares here that I'm going to be able to use in my stash. And what is wonderful about it is that bulky mess of fabrics and remnants turned into some very neat, organized squares that take up so much less room in my quilting studio. Plus, it is much more inspiring looking at this than looking at a mess of fabric. You know, the tub itself is really quite a mess. Every time I look at that tub of scraps, it's a little daunting, but just take a section of it at a time. For me to get through that tub that's behind me that you've seen a picture of, it's going to take me a few weeks. I'll need to just set some appointments with myself and actually get it cut and sorted. And that's what I recommend that you all do. Set some appointments with yourself where you're literally taking a couple of hours or an evening or a weekend and cutting up your scrap stash. Maybe have a friend come over and do it with them. It's kind of a mindless job to do. It's simple. And so listen to some music, spend that time with a friend. Maybe you could Zoom a friend as you're doing this. But it's a wonderful way to get your scraps cut up, sorted, and ready to use. Once they're all cut, then I'm going to identify containers. And I like to use a tool that I can identify, or a labeler actually, and I can identify what's inside my containers all on the lids and all the way around, whatever size it is, and I'll put all my 1.5 inch, 2.5 inch, 3, etc. in these totes. You can get these at the dollar store, at Target, at Walmart, IKEA. They're just all over. And then there are also these types of containers that I put my larger squares in, my 7-inch, my 8-inch, 9-inch, etc. And then my 10-inch squares, which are right here, those will go in a drawer. I have some white cabinets off to the side that you might see behind my sewing machine, and that's where I'll store the 10-inch squares. And then, of course, my strips I also put in containers just like this. I just lay the strips in there and identify the strip and the width that it is. That's how I store everything. And then I do have many, many video tutorials for you on my YouTube channel that teach you how to use your scrap stash. Once you have it all cut, sorted, and organized, now you want to actually use it. You've gone through the work of getting it sorted and cut and ready to go. So let's make sure you use it in a beautiful, scrappy pattern. The pile that I had pressed and laid on the table here is completely cut. It just took me, even as I was chatting with you through this video, probably 45 minutes to accomplish that. This is the rest of what has been cut. So I have a lot of strips that I've been working on. I'm cutting mine in the widths of 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3.5. And then I have a few templates that I've gotten started with here too. So I'll continue working on my container of remnants, scrap remnants, so that I can get them cut, sorted, and organized and ready to use. I have a lot of wonderful strip quilt patterns. I've got the cool kaleidoscope pattern. I think maybe some of you are familiar with it from Ricky Timms. I'm going to be making a few of those and hope you'll join me as I put some of those together. They're really fast and fun. I think you'll enjoy that. And I want to also try and do some template quilts for you as well. So in some upcoming videos that I'll have, you'll get to see that. Thank you so much for joining me today as I scrapped up my stash here and got it ready so that I can use it to make some beautiful scrappy quilts. Hope you'll join me and continue working on your stash as well. Don't forget to check out the video below. I've got a link in the description box. It'll take you to the video that walks you through step by step on how to use my techniques, my Speedy Solutions techniques, to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use. Between these two books, this is the patterns book and this is the techniques book, there's a total of 17 scrappy patterns. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Links are below. But definitely make sure you watch that video so that you can just know exactly what you need to do to get going on your scrap stash. Hopefully today's video has helped you to understand how I go through my stash and get it sorted and cut and ready to go. And I hope that you'll join me on that as well. If you like the content that I provide on my channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any questions or if you're working on your scrap stash. I love to hear from my viewers. Thank you so much for doing that. And until next week, happy quilting.